Hello, welcome back. Okay, so I'm going to talk about in this next video chapter 4 and 5, and there's not as much analysis. What I don't know, I may end up going off on something and it may take up time, but I don't think these two chapters are really that important in terms of writing a Q3 question, because a lot of it is trying to fill in plot. And we're not interested in plot right now. So it does, however, give you an idea of who Gatsby really is, at least as in terms of his insecurity, and he's made up by so many people, and so many people are saying things about him. But this is when you actually get to see his personality with Daisy and with Nick. And he kind of has a terrible personality, really. He has a great charisma. He's got like a wonderful smile and these powerful gestures, and he knows how to charm. But when I really get close up to him, he seems like a lost person. So in the beginning of chapter 4, there's these, of course, ongoing rumors about he's this, he's that, and then he talks about journaling all the people who've been in and out of Gatsby's house, and it sort of seems like this is kind of superfluous, but I think the reason why he's doing it is he's demonstrating the elite crowd from East Egg, people he knew from Yale, compared to the entrepreneur types from West Egg. And I think if you look closely, the names from West Egg opposed to East Egg seem more ethnic. What's kind of missed in all of this is that this is also during a time of great migration, especially in this area between New Jersey and New York. And you get a lot of Polish names, Russian names, there's Jewish names, and then of course one of the characters who comes up in this is Jewish. This caused a little bit of problems for Fitzgerald, because when you meet Wolfsheim, he's Jewish, and there's some description about his, let me see if it's right. His flat nose, and he kind of does something that Dickens does. Dickens does this in Great Expectations with, I think it's Walpole's, I can't think of his name now, but he has this Roman nose, and he was always, so I think the Romans must have always been giving each other issues with their noses. And it's really a technique to look at a characteristic that really stands out in a person, and then let that kind of lead their personality. So when he says, Wolfsheim's nose flashed at me indignantly, he turns around and then he says, oh, wait. He describes him as a small, flat-nosed Jew, and raises his large head with 2 fine growths of hair. Oh, luxuriated in either nostril. So after a moment, I discovered his tiny eyes in half darkness. So he's using kind of a stereotype of a Jewish person. Now, the reason why I say this is problematic is because he also makes this remark that some people have connected to the experiments that the Germans were doing on the Jews during the time of the Holocaust. Especially when he says, his cuff buttons. You know, you're looking at my cuff buttons. And he says, I wasn't actually looking at them. And then he says, fine specimen of human molars. And I certainly see that there seems to be a lot of post-World War II words and significance. But this was before that. And this book was written 1925. The experimentation on Jews really didn't happen until maybe 1939. Now, he may have been aware of things and hearing things that was going to happen. But I don't know that Fitzgerald would have used it, would have been, that we could really accuse him of being anti-Semitic, because he has a reputation for having a good relationship with Jewish people, and he was also Irish Catholic. So I think he was a little bit more sympathetic to people from other races and so forth. But speaking of other races, though, you see when he's driving over the bridge, and this is, I think, significant. Queensbridge Bridge is always the city seen for the first time, and its first wild promise of all mystery and beauty in the world. And he's in that, gorgeous yellow car that Gatsby's driving, which Tom calls a circus wagon. And as they're driving by, there's a funeral, and it's a black family, and there's a white chauffeur. And so the way that Nick describes this is that they passed by him. We crossed Blackwell's Island, and a limousine passed us, driven by a white chauffeur in which sat 3 modish Negroes, 2 bucks and a girl. And I laughed aloud at the yolks of their eyeballs rolled towards us in haughty rivalry. Anything can happen now that we slid over this bridge. And I think that is kind of a nod to the migration of just, this is also what people consider the new Negro, the people who, they had some independence and they had some money in their pocket. And of course you see what a snob Nick is too, even though Nick is not, he's looked down upon at, from people from East Egg. He still looks down from people that he feels is inferior to him. And so this is definitely it's not a lot about racism or anything like that, but you see that here. And I think that that's why also the names of people coming in, you start to see that there's this migration. Now, how does that fit into what you're trying to say with the American dream? Well, remember, Tom Buchanan is afraid of the rise of the colored people or whatever. And I said earlier that this threatens, his civilization, when he says civilization is going to pieces. So in terms of the American dream, the fact that people are coming to this country and they are starting to be able to get businesses and work, and they are entitled to the American dream too. Langston Hughes wrote a wonderful poem called I Too. And if you've ever seen The Great Debaters, Denzel Washington is the teacher, and he stands up on the desk and he reads this poem. And I don't have it in front of me, but he basically says, I am the other brother. I'm told to sit in the kitchen. But I laugh and I smile because I know that someday I will be somewhere else. And at the end he says, I too am American. I really ought to grab that poem and look at it. So at any rate, he is also threatened, I think. I think this is why Nick comes off as racist and snobbish in this scene, because it's kind of like the way people feel about immigration now, it's always met with this fear-based reaction that these people are going to come in and take our jobs. And that this dream seems to only be for those entitled to it. And that's why Langston Hughes says, I too am America. I too deserve the same idea that, you know, if I do what I'm supposed to do and work hard enough, that I could do great things, and great things could come to me through that. So, again, I'm not going to say a whole lot about plots. You do see that he tells Nick kind of in a very uncomfortable way, what is your impression of me? And that's what I mean by he's very insecure. He says, I don't want you to get the wrong idea about me. And he says, I'm going to tell you the honest to God truth. And then he lies and says that he comes from money. He later, in the next chapter, will contradict himself. And also, Wolfsheim will also say that when he met him, he was nothing. So there's already an indication that Gatsby is not honest. He's not telling the truth, but he pulls out this little medal thing from the war, and he pulls out this picture of him from Oxford, and Nick immediately says, then it's all true. You know, so that's all he needs is this little bit of, I wouldn't say evidence, because you find out later on that he's not really educated at Oxford. It's one thing to go to Oxford for a short time and visit and see classes or whatever, but to actually be able to say that and that you know, were accepted there and graduated from there is a completely different thing. Okay, so they have this very awkward lunch, and Wolfsheim says he's getting kind of sentimental as he looks at the restaurant across the street, and he remembers old Rosie Rosenthal, and he tells this little story about how the six of them were at the table and they had been eating, and Rosie had a lot to eat and was really happy. And then somebody, it's just like kind of like in a mob movie, somebody wants to speak to him outside. Wolfsheim warns him not to, let the bastards come in here, he says. And he said, don't let anybody touch my coffee. And then he went outside in the sidewalk, and they shot him 3 times in his full belly and drove away. And I think it's significant that he says his full belly. You're going to remember that later on when there's other deaths. But right after that, it's kind of, this is where you see a little bit of Fitzgerald's humor, and I think it's also something that Dickens often did too. Because right after he tells this story of this guy who got killed, he says, I understand you're looking for a business connection. And he says, the juxtaposition of these two remarks was startling. And Gatsby answered for me, oh no, this isn't the guy. So you know that there's also, you know, when Gatsby disappears and he's talking to these people and in and out. I mean, you get the sense that whatever he's doing, it's definitely illegal, and it's run kind of like the way a mob would be run. He pays off the cop that stops him, or he doesn't have to even pay off. He just tells him who he is and says that the commissioner, you know, owes him. He did him a big favor. So you see that there is kind of this mob connection, which again wouldn't be surprising to have a Jewish character here, especially since he said that he fixed the World Series, which was actually Arnold Rothstein, who was a Jew and notoriously, you know, fixed the World Series. And so it's obvious that why he's using that guy as the character. So after that, Tom walks in, asks Nick, what are you doing here? And obviously they're in a really nice place where Nick probably wouldn't be eating lunch. And then he tries to introduce him to Gatsby, and then Gatsby introduces himself, and then he ends up disappearing, which kind of foreshadows the connection that he has with Daisy. So he arranges, instead of just telling Nick himself what's going on, which kind of irritates Nick, he gets Jordan to tell him the story. And so Jordan goes into the backstory here, which I don't think needs a lot of analyzing because you can just simply read it. But what you see is that she had been in love with him, or at least thought she was in love with him, and then he went to war, and then Tom comes, and he's like the wealthiest man they've ever seen, and he buys her these pearls valued as $350,000. So she's going to marry him. She has second thoughts. She gets drunk for the first time in her life, and she was going to, give back the pearls and say Daisy's changed her mind. They bring her back to her senses, put her in the bathtub, and then the next day she gets married, and she's apparently happy after that for a little while. So they vacation at Santa Barbara, and they come back. Thought I'd never seen a girl so mad about her husband. When he left the room for a minute, she would look around and say, "Where's Tom?" So you start to see some insecurity on her part. And then, not too long after they've been married, Tom is already seen with another woman. They get into a little car accident. She broke her arm, and it makes the papers. And that's when it starts the moving around, I think. And I think Fitzgerald probably put that, restless moving part in there because he and Zelda also did the same thing. They moved around when things would happen. They would get out, and try to save their reputation for a while, and then they would get back into another crowd, and it would start over again. So they moved with a fast crowd, all of them young and rich and wild. But she came out with an absolute perfect reputation, perhaps because she didn't drink. And that was probably very helpful. So, let's see. After that, she figures out the connection. And he says that, Nick says, well, it's just a strange coincidence. And she says, no, it wasn't. He planned this the whole time. So he has these parties, you learn, that really it's because, he doesn't really care for them himself. He just thought maybe she would wander in there at some point. And of course, that's not her crowd. And when you do see her at a party later on, you see that she and Tom just don't really fit in with those people. They feel like they're above them. And she's not really having a good time. And so it's kind of been for nothing. So he gets back to Nick, and we're in chapter 5. And the very beginning of the description is the house is all lit up, and then the lights would go down. And the image there is he says, only wind in the trees which blew the wires and made the lights go on and off again, as if the house had winked in the darkness. Later on, he says, yeah, it looks like a fair. And if you look at the cover, you have kind of this carnival going on, but there's also a very sad face of, maybe it's Daisy, it's a flapper woman type, and she's crying, and it's a very dark cover with just this shining light, which is what the house is supposed to represent. I mean, at first he says it looked like it was on fire. So when he says, I will invite her over, what day would suit you? And Gatsby corrected him and said, no, what day would suit you? He's always very careful to make sure that nobody is doing him a favor without him going out of his way. He even brings up some work, I know you don't make a lot of money. I do have this little side business that you might enjoy, that you could do. It would be really low key. And Nick is saying, I can invite her over for tea without you having to do anything in return. See, this a friendship that's building here is it's just very insecure. Like he doesn't really trust. Why would this guy do anything nice for me if I don't buy it, if I don't pay him? And of course he goes overboard with flowers and all that kind of stuff. And Lerman's version of The Great Gatsby does a great job of showing. A lot of people say, well, it's just too much. That was kind of the point, is really to show that this is excessive. And it's not even really needed. But he thinks in his mind he has to keep doing this to impress her. So you see his insecurity as they come there. It's like 2 minutes to 4. He's already decided she's not coming. I'm leaving. He's nervous. Finally, she pulls in, and they have this kind of awkward meeting. He breaks a clock, and finally, Nick says, I'm just going to leave and I'll come right back. And Gatsby gets real nervous. Where are you going? What are you doing? And when Nick points out to him, you're acting like a child, Gatsby is wait a minute, I got to be in control at all times. And he says that you're just embarrassed, and Daisy's embarrassed too. She's embarrassed, he repeated incredulously. Just as much as you are. Don't talk so loud. And you notice that he later on, when someone else is talking to Daisy and Nick, and I think for Gatsby, he's controlling himself, but he also really tries to control every situation that he's in. So if it sounds like someone else is just, talking too much, or this is happening, he tries to stop it and get things the way that he wants. So they talk, and then he says it stops raining, and now Gatsby's kind of giddy because they've reconnected, and he wants to show Daisy his house. So Nick says, you sure you want me to go? And he says, absolutely, old sport. So Daisy washes her face, and he gets out and he says, my house looks well, doesn't it? He demanded. He always has kind of this, also like Tom, is also very aggressive. I agreed, it was splendid. And then he's kind of just, I don't know, it's just talking. So he says, it just took me 3 years to earn the money. He says, I thought you inherited the money. I did, old sport, but then I lost it during the big panic like everybody else. And so then he asked him what he does, and he says, that's my business. So he's like, he's almost like forgotten himself, and then he remembers himself and tries to play it cool again. But this is something, he can never be comfortable. He can never be comfortable in his situation. Because even though he may have worked really hard to get there, he didn't get it in an honest way. And now everything that he does is going to be in question. He just has to keep living this lie. And it's catching up with him. Even when he's at the house, he gets interrupted. He's got to take a phone call. So they go through the house, and he's getting more giddy. He says, Gatsby sat down and shaded his eyes and began to laugh. And he says, it's the funniest thing, old sport, he said hilariously. I can't, when I try to, he's just so happy and nearly falls down the stairs. And then he's been full of, this is how Fitzgerald describes it. He had been full of the idea so long, dreamed it right through the end, waited with his teeth set, so to speak, at an inconceivable pinch of intensity. Now, in the reaction, he was running down like an overwhelmed clock. So there's this kind of winding up, winding down feel. And in his elation, he goes and he just starts throwing all his shirts at her. Like, look what I got. And, it's kind of a childish thing to do. And she's equally childish in that she cries over it and just says, I believe I've never seen such beautiful shirts. In the way that you would maybe cry at sunset or some kind of scenery when you go, gosh, this is just gorgeous. She's looking at these just beautiful colors and different, silky material. but it's still just material that brings her to tears. So after that, they hang around a little bit. He makes the guy play the piano. The guy says, I'm not really good. He says, don't talk so much old sport, just do it. You gotta create the moment here. Don't spoil anything. And so I'm going to read this one passage because I have it marked. Almost 5 years, there must have been moments, even after that afternoon, when Daisy tumbled short of his dreams. Not through her own fault, but because of the colossal vitality of his illusion. And later I'm going to, in chapter 6, I'm going to really start to analyze Daisy's, or his fascination with Daisy. And I'll talk a little bit about desire and Lacan's idea of desire. So he's thrown himself in, he's created this, a creative passion, added to it all the time, decking it out with every bright feather and drifted his way. No amount of fire or freshness can challenge what a man will store up in his ghostly heart. So I don't want to start that because I want to make sure I connect it with Gatsby's Platonic version of himself. So that is all I'm going to say about those 2 chapters, and then I'll have a lot more to say about chapter 6. All right, thanks.